Hello, my name is Greg Madison, and this is The Living Process. Today, I'm speaking again with Donata Schoeller. Donata is a philosopher who's done a lot of work on embodied critical thinking and translating a process model into German. We've had a few different conversations. Each sort of ends with a spark to the next one. And that's the same with this one, where we're talking a little bit about inside, outside, and how to understand kind of the symbolizing process and the focusing process. And it ends with a tantalizing kind of teaser for the next conversation. So without saying anything more, here's the next conversation with Donata Schoeller. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, welcome back, Donata. And this is our fourth recording.
I
And I want to just say where we left it a little bit last time and then see if we go in a different direction or what comes next. We were talking about the principle of interaction first, and that led to a brief discussion about the idea of inside and outside. And when we talk about something being in the body, if we want to say the word in, because that could imply something that we don't mean. And both of us have been thinking a little bit more about the inside outside, but maybe there's other things even broader than that that you'd like to start with.
Yes. So I think it's a very nice and interesting place to dwell together.
Mhm.
And because on the one side, I think this interaction first, and I think we talked about that last time, kind of opens up this framework of inside and outside. Is that what we perceive with in our embodied existence is always a complicated, interactional, entangled situation that you can unfold and unfold and unfold, and that this is not graspable in this terms of, this is just subjective insight and there's an objective. So I think that was where we were.
Mhm.
But then we came across, but it's more intricate, and that leads us into how Gendon conceives language, and that leads us into more deeper into the process model landscape and in the very complex and thick parts of the process model chapter 7.
Yes.
And maybe we can just kind of try to explore that a bit together. I think there are two things that I would like to try to unfold together with you. First of all, how Gendon really nicely develops how symboling opens up a totally different space than behaving and what he means by that.
Mhm.
And then also how this, how he makes thinkable why languaging or putting things to words is not just representing something or constructing or labeling, but that it is really that we can understand why this helps us to become aware, why this helps us, what kind of transformation is, what kinds of experience it is. I think he always wants to clarify what kind of experience is behind anything, also behind languaging, using language. So these two, the space and the awareness. And I think that's connected to the inside-outside question.
It already sounds complicated. Let me say back to you the little bit that I do feel like I understand. That there is the kind of behavior context, and in process model, he uses the example of fighting behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a kind of a dance, which is different from that, in that it's more like a symbolizing, it has an aboutness. The fighting behavior doesn't have that aboutness. It's what's actually just happening in the situation, back and forth between two animals in some way, each implying the next act in the other.
Mhm.
But the dance, that sort of more symbolic turn, has that kind of aboutness.
Mhm.
And that aboutness generates something more like a kind of awareness.
Mhm.
Is that much right?
Yes, yes. But I would, if it's okay for you, start even a little more simple or more,
Good.
an
Oh, please,
everyday example. That,
please do.
So when preparing for this conversation,
Yeah.
I remembered I looked at Hideo Tanaka's website the other day, and he makes these fantastic bridges, to inspirations of Zen.
Mhm.
And I think it's Susan Langer who considered this difference, how a cat may react to a postcard and how we react to a postcard, that there's similarities and differences. And it's not about now the difference of human beings, animals. That's really, really boring. It's not about that. It's about understanding the different kind of process. And I was thinking about the following example. So you imagine a 12-year-old child, and she has birthday, and on her desk is a card with a picture of a cat. Yes. And on the card, it just says, you will be the owner of this cat. Yeah. So it's a kind of indication. And then just imagine, the cat seeing this card and maybe playing around with this card. And the child maybe taking this card, and you see the behavior. You can see, how she's taking it and how she's standing there. And maybe she's totally numb for joy
Yes.
and overwhelmment.
Yeah.
There's something that this card does and opens up in this linguistic body of the child that is not in the space, in the behavior space of, taking the cat and taking the card and putting it in a box. There's
Yes.
something else happening. She can then take the card and put it in a box or put it on the wall, but there's some process that we cannot see in her behaving.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole world of joy, of longing, of knowing about cats, about maybe even feeling the cat already a little bit, of knowing about the change this will imply in her life. All of that is done with these few little symbols.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the process that Jean wants to describe in this chapter 7, building up on already chapter 6, which unfolds the thickness of behavior space without which symboling couldn't grow. And this is interesting for a question of inside and outside,
Yeah.
because on the one hand, it doesn't make sense to speak of inside and outside, because we are interactional situated bodies. And on the other hand, these complex processes that involve linguistic meanings, so much more happens than we can see with the eye. You cannot just see, like, the way people behave,
Mm-hmm.
what happens with the world that is opening up through this in this linguistic space. So
Yeah.
thinking that together.
Okay, so let me respond to that. It's a fantastic example. I can really imagine it. And the first thing I imagine is how much actually is visible in the child's, sort of being struck silent with delight and processing, as we would say, inside of herself or through herself, all of the implications of what this card means. For her, it's not just an object in the world like it is for the cat. It has this symbolic meaning which she is immediately taking in, and this whole process is ignited by that. Some of which is visible. You would see something on her face. You would see something in her way of her kind of response in the world. But you're pointing out that most of it is not visible. Most of it is happening in a different kind of a space. It's not present through her behaving.
Yes.
And the one thing that I would say, that this is the area that I found interesting, is that if you were there as like a neighbor or something, and you witnessed this child getting this gift in the form of the card initially, and seeing the child's response, I would imagine that you would feel down, if you paid attention, you would feel down inside of yourself
Mm.
some kind of response to her response.
Yeah. Yes.
There would be an aliveness in you, or you would be moved to see her response. Something would happen in you that is already an immediate kind of interaction with what's happening in her.
Certainly,
Okay.
certainly, certainly.
Yeah. And I just want to say, as an aside, this is the sort of thing that we try in different ways, we try to pay attention to in psychotherapy.
Mhm.
Because, as I would say to people that I supervise, there's so much information in that. And a therapist can potentially say, in a session where a client was crying, the therapist might say, I really didn't feel much.
Mhm.
And I would always say, well, maybe that's information.
Mhm. Mhm.
That there's something about the bodily interaction with the client in that moment that tells you something.
Mhm.
In one client who cries, you're deeply moved.
Mhm.
And with another client that cries, you're not.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, in a sense, there's the inside outside that you're pointing to, that so much of it is not seen,
Mhm.
is not visible.
Mhm.
And yet, in some way, it's somehow accessible.
Mhm.
Something.
Mhm. Yes, I mean, yes, I mean, I think this also indicates, that we are, Jensen also uses this beautiful term that symbols or language, is a grown environment which our bodies imply. There, those basic concepts of the basic model reapply that this kind of meaning that is built up in language, it needs to be enacted. And okay, now I have to be careful that I don't want to, because I don't want to kind of recapitulate this chapter 7, and also want to connect back to your question in some ways. I think with the handle I want to hold on to, we are linguistic bodies. We are immersed in this environment of meaning, which is, so much more than just explicit words. It has felt dimensions and experiential resonances, and we can also, we sense words very differently if we open up to the resonances, and maybe we also understand each other better if we do this. Then, if we can cut meaning. We know that we can just use words too quickly and too superficially and so on. So in that sense, maybe also, how we embody, or how we allow ourselves to experience the meaning that we say, maybe allows the other person also to be part of this happening. It's a different happening. It's a different process that might answer this instance you are bringing up.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, maybe a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Let me just see if this is an instance of what you're pointing to. Because I was teaching something the other day, and I was saying that it makes all the difference in the world if you actually, I was teaching about the inner critic and about bringing compassion to the inner critic, and how it's a completely different thing if you can actually bring a feeling of compassion to the inner critic. It has to be the feeling. You can't just say to the inner critic, I accept you, without the feeling. The words themselves don't do what the actual bodily sense that the words are supposed to bring with them does.
Yes, exactly. And I think this is, now to reconnect it to the process model, I think the process model shows that meaning is a process that starts with tissue process, that implies a thick behavioral space where body environment always already interacts. It has grown from that on a on a, on a evolutionary scale, but also on a personal scale. And it continues to grow through, all the situations where we are immersed in language, where we use words. And so that in some sense, and that I think is so that is something that we still know so little, or we know so little how to engage this deliberately, that we can open up meaning in exactly as you say. We can do so much more with, if we understand words as these processes with all these experiential layers to it.
Mm-hmm.
we can use we can feel, can open up to them much more, and that's something that we don't usually learn. I
Yeah.
think that's something very novel in this kind of experiential approach,
Yes.
embodied experiential approach to meaning. And that's why you need to explain that the word is not enough,
Mm-hmm.
but you can open up to the resonance or to what the word does. And you see, does the word do something? No, it doesn't. Okay, this word doesn't do anything. So let's try another word, because they are happenings.
Yeah, exactly. They are happenings. Exactly. It's what I get from what you're saying is that the phenomenon is actually the experiencing process. The words are what kind of are sort of the tag or the handle or the pointer. But what we're really interested in is this thicker experiencing process.
Yes. And maybe we could even say words are experiential processes themselves. They are, I sometimes say they're like capsules of experiential process, because we can open up the felt meaning of almost every word that we know well
Mhm.
enough. They
Mhm.
are some sort of experience. Even
Mhm.
the word but
Mhm. Yes.
is an experience. And then it's really more about crossing. Does this experiential capsule, if we if we use it now and let it occur into this experiencing, does it unfold this? Does it intensify the resonance? Does it intensify the feeling? And there we would come to this, to Jenden's dance approach. I just
Mhm.
want to make just that's a buoy where we could easily go that intense. But maybe you want to say something.
Well, I just want to say back to you, I feel like saying words can have that kind of capsule. They may or may not, but it's something about the word that's used. Certainly, there's some words that are just like a big gong. It's like, oh my goodness, that immediately does something. But there's also words that I'm thinking immediately of. For example, if somebody says, shame on you,
Mm.
or somebody says, shame on you,
Mm.
it's a totally different, one is like you're being damned, and the other is like you're being teased.
That's the tone, of course.
It's the tone, yeah,
Of
that
course.
sets the cloud around the word in some way. Yeah,
Exactly. It's the tone, it's the gesture, it's all of that. Yeah, yeah. And how it then crosses with the experiential situation right now.
exactly. Because somebody might say that to you in a teasing way, and you're a little taken aback. It's like, oh, I'm not sure I know this person well enough to be
Yeah.
teased by them.
Exactly. 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 Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So I think in the theory of personality change,
Mhm.
and I think it's a bit connected. I hope I hope I can make explicit why I think it's implicitly connected to what we're talking about. Jean says, well, why does it matter that, we all of a sudden become aware of where the problem lies? Why does it matter? Why should it matter? Like in analytical theories, it seems to you just have to see what the problem is, and then it's solved. Well, why should it be solved if you just see? There must be something else, yeah, happening. And that's also, of course, that analytical therapists totally have acknowledged that it's not enough that you just see or understand it. You must work it through, and there's all this, and there's this creativity and this transformation and so on.
Yeah.
What I found, I think, so surprising, and this brings me now to the dance that, Jean said, he comes from the pragmatist tradition and the phenomenologist tradition, and George Herbert Mead was the first one to, to think also in ways that to understand science, you must start from an interactional situation. And he has two dogs fighting. And he says, it's not, we shouldn't understand, we shouldn't start like this symbol stands for this and this stands for this, because we never understand this intersubjective immediacy happening. And then he brings those two dogs, that the gesture and position of the one dog is already, makes a change in the position of the other dog, and that makes a change. So it's the other dog that changes the other dog,
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that is happening in our language, that what you say, already makes it me able to say something else, and we don't first have to translate. Now, what is he saying? And then it's this. But then Jen then does something else, going through to these, having this instinct to maybe anchor meaning also in these ritual dances. And what I found, it really opened up something for me, that he said, if you imagine these ritual dances where you do gestures that you normally do in the quickness of a fight, but all of a sudden it becomes a dance, or in mating procedures, and all of a sudden it becomes a dance. And then the gesture, enacting the gesture makes you feel the behavior and the whole behavior context. Just doing the gesture, you feel this whole context, and that's not a slight thing. You feel your blood pressure and your adrenaline rising. Just doing the gesture again and again. With the gesture, you're connected to a whole context, and by repeating it, you become aware what it is like to be in this context. That's really an interesting entry into meaning. And he said, well, maybe only through this gesturing we become aware of this context, because becoming aware implies time. Feeling a feeling implies time. So it's through these gestures that it was to evoke, the contexts in which they are normally, just happening as behavior, and just kind of tasting or getting aware of what it is like to, to fight or to do this or to do that. And that I find and that is still something, even though, he doesn't want to make a natural history, but he has this ability to find a red thread of something very primary to something we can still connect to. And this is something, why we talk things through. We talk it through like this, and then like this, and then like this. And if we're connected, we stay connected with it, it really becomes clearer. Now I know what this was about. Now I know, and this is the process, as if, we're through this speaking from, we become aware what all of this, it's always so much, is about. And this, of course, then is a different process, which we normally don't have in the incident itself, where just everything happens together so quickly. So I don't know, I talked a bit too much now, maybe.
No, let me just say what that brings up for me, and then I'm curious to see if you feel understood by this.
Yeah.
What it brings up for me is it's like it's almost like two dogs fighting. It's just the behavior of what's happening. But in the dance that may involve some of the same gestures, it's almost as though you're kind of holding the behavior and savoring it over and over. And there's something in that process that generates a kind of a reflection, reflexivity, or a feeling of the whole thing.
feeling of the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than just behavior in the
Exactly.
action. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And this he calls pauses in behaving.
Mhm.
So this he called pauses in behaving, where you do the same, but what these kind of gestures are not behavior anymore, but they are ways to be in contact, to feel and to evoke the context that comes along with these gestures. Yeah.
Can I just ask, it immediately makes me think of focusing
Mhm.
and how in focusing we bring our attention to a felt sense and we stay with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to give it a lot of attention. You have to be with it for a long time. And maybe what we sometimes forget, and certainly somebody who's new to focusing doesn't get often, is that what you're staying with in the felt sense is this kind of thing. It's like this holding of the
Mhm.
situation and feeling it and feeling it and feeling it and feeling it.
Exactly. And the words that we use, that we tentatively use, are like gestures.
Mhm,
Do these
mhm.
words help evoke? Do
Yeah,
these help have? Do these,
yeah,
oh,
exactly.
it's hard, it's blue, it's sharp,
Mhm,
it's
mhm, mhm.
it's a pressure, or it's what kind of, that's a bit like, yeah, that's right. That's
And
right.
in that case, the felt sense is a little bit like a dance. It's a process. It's not a stuck thing.
Yeah.
It's a thing that
Yeah,
it's a process that's happening over and over and over as you pay
exactly.
attention.
The felt sensing is a dance. I think
Yeah.
that is really, and as if we are really very much there at some kind of primary process of making meaning. We slow down, and we just do little bits of what is this about? What is this like? What is this about? What is this about? What this is about this, and then we become aware of it.
Mhm, mhm.
And that's why time is such an important factor in these processes. And you can always, since if you bring focusing into contexts where this is not understood in this way, and you don't have the time, you just not possible to open up anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Not possible to open up awareness, or this, or feeling the scope of this feeling, and all the awareness, what is attached to it, with more feeling. It's as if we are we are we are allowing also, like, a different, sounds very grand now, but a different world to emerge, a different being in the world, and a different understanding of world that comes about in this way.
Mhm.
um yes, that's rather fascinating.
And
But yeah, okay.
no, you might not want to take it in this direction this quickly, but it immediately again makes me think of the difference between, because I do both, the difference between focusing alone and focusing with another person. Because the way we were describing it, it sounds like a private world opens
Mm.
within which you can hold the whole situation so that it processes itself over and over, and words or symbols come that help evoke more or don't. But it's different if you're doing that with another person, that somehow it is a private space and it isn't separate from the presence of the other person.
Well, first of all, I would really not call it a private space.
Okay.
Of course, we, in it's a kind of private thing we do, but what we are processing is really being in the world, that situations that involve so many others,
Mhm,
and coming
mhm.
out of this process, we go into different kind of action, we go into different kind of relations. It might change, just a little shift in holding all this entanglement might then change a lot if we go from the pause again into action. But then your point is so right. It's so much easier to do it together.
So let me just say back to you, and also clarify what I meant by private
Mm.
space. What you're actually focusing on is your being in the world.
Yes, of
It's
course.
not some separate subjectivity you're focusing on. It's your relationships with others, it's your dilemmas in living, it's your way of being with others, it's all that sort of thing. It's
I wouldn't even know where a separate subjectivity would be found.
but the thing, yes, exactly. Let's get to
Where
that.
is it? I have to look for it.
Yeah. Um, but I somehow want to capture
Yeah.
a facet of it
Mm.
that it's interesting. If you're focusing with another person, it's often easier. And sometimes the right word will come from your listener rather than from you. So somehow they're implicated in the whole processing, even though the content of what you're paying attention to, you might keep private.
Mhm. Yeah. So what you mean is that, so you mean two things, that it's interesting that sometimes the right word can come from the other person. And you also mean that you can even not present any content. Yeah, you can do focusing without saying what it's about. And that even though the other person can find the right words, or what is it that you
Well, I'm wanting to sort of tease apart. I
yeah,
feel almost like I'm arguing the other side of what I argued last time.
that's good. Interesting. Yeah.
But I'm wanting to tease apart, and I think that this is a good example, focusing and listening. I'm wanting to tease apart the experience of focusing on something that you might keep to yourself, the content you keep to yourself, and yet the process
Mm.
is not entirely yours.
Mm.
You know, it will process itself differently depending on the listener you have.
Yes, yes, yes.
And yet, even if you don't name the content,
Mhm.
you might say all sorts of handle words or symbols that come without saying what it's about in your life.
Mm.
But even if you don't, I would guess that it sometimes happens that your listener, when it's their turn to focus, ends up focusing on something that has some similarity to what you were focusing on, even if they didn't know what you were focusing
Yeah.
on.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. And at least and at least you know that what you're focusing on has such a resonance on what they are holding at the moment, you know, that it of course deeply affects them, and they can immediately go differently into their own processes by having listened to your process. Yes.
Exactly. So in some way, it's like there's an inside where you can keep the content for
Mm.
yourself,
Mhm.
and yet there's not a separation.
No. And that's really, you know, what I experience so often. And I would, you know, if you, for instance, I just gave a thinking at the edge class a few 3 weeks ago with lots of engineers for, you know, energy and online communication people, and also public management. And I thought this process will be very strange for them, you know. And at the beginning, they didn't quite know what they were allowed to do, but when they got it, it's just so amazing, you know. And then I was able to hop from one diet or to the next to see how, you know, these were students, how they are each deeply involved and concerned with kind of like a shared, something shared that they're carrying, something shared of, you know, feeling, you know, I don't know, the kind of crisis we are in so many different, each process so different, but something, and that is so kind of so heartwarming to see that, you know, all these individuals that seem so separate and they're dressed differently and they might not look interested at all in, you know, at the beginning, they all maybe look at their iPhones or so. And then you just go a little bit into this space where they can process more of you know, of the complexity of what concerns them, what is relevant to them, and you have the feeling they're jointly holding a bigger situation.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just so, you know, so heartwarming to see that. So I think we're all, you know, our very individualist culture and our, you know, making the subject so strong, it kind of has little words and little knowing how deeply interconnected we are. It's just so deeply interconnected. You just has to put the dust a little bit away, you know, the dust of individuality a little bit away. And we are so, and that's also, you know, I mean, we can also experience this if you're immersed in a conversation. Sometimes you just have to say very few words and you get it immediately. I mean, you can also get it wrong, but there's something, we are immersed in a common life world net. And this is the basic of our meaning. And, you know, it's not the language that then, you know, and we are separated, and through the language we have, it's so different. It's, yeah.
And now I feel like you're arguing the other side from what you did last time, which is very interesting.
I didn't look at our conversation, so I don't know what I said.
Because the last time I was wanting to somehow argue against there being an inside and an outside, that there's this kind of shared interaction. And you're saying, well, interaction first still has an inside and an outside. And I'm saying, let's not use the word inside.
Yes.
And now I'm wanting to say, but there's something that's kind of private.
Yes.
And you're wanting to say, but we're with the shared.
Yes. 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 And, you know, I think it's really very paradoxical, because I think it's very private, very intimate, and then again so shared, but so each one has this kind of share in such a specific, extraordinary, unique way, you know. And
but you're right that it's so common that if you listen to someone who's focusing, that you have it's like your body somehow resonates with a deep sense of the meaning of what they're focusing on.
Yes. And I would even like to say it even stronger. I don't know if I said that already, but I think that was one of my major experiences at the beginning, you know, to be in groups where there are people you would have never met before. Very, very diverse people, very diverse. And then it's always also, you know, you have these quick prejudgments of, I don't know, terrible, you know, really, but they come so quick. And then you sit in a focusing space, and then this other person who you might have first think, well, this, I don't think I will have very much to say with him or her.
Yes.
Going there, and all of a sudden, you know, it is as if, I don't know, it just as if respect grows just by witnessing, just by listening, just by hearing the kind of challenges that are so family related to the kind of challenge. And this, I think, is always again happening to me, that to see, you know, it sounds maybe a little bit, but I find that people one can see the beauty in the people if they go into this space. I can also see the beauty in the in people engaging with thinking at the edge. There's some kind of beauty, and I would like to understand it better. What makes this so beautiful? It's really interesting, but it's just immediately this respect just kicks in, and every time, I've never experienced it that it doesn't happen, you know.
Yeah, me too. And for me, it just as I listen to you, I'm thinking, what is that beauty? And I would say it's something that's yearning for a profound connection in some way. It's yearning for that experience of the connection to the whole world, or the worlding itself, or something that's not common, unfortunately.
Yes, and there's some words that come to me are kind of, you know, sincerity, you know, that if you go in this, there comes a sincerity or an integrity words like that, but I want to make dot, 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 because it's, yeah, we could,
Yeah,
we could hold that question, you know, and would really, yeah.
it's a kind of a truthfulness or something.
Well, I think, Greg, I think that's quite a good point to stop. Don't you think so too?
Yeah, I
Because,
do.
you know, I would have a really nice big topic I would like to speak with you, explore it, but let's do it the next time.
Okay, what is the topic?
The topic is that, you know, Jenlin conceives of, he has this word of fresh, for he said he loves the word fresh.
Yeah.
And what he also very, you know, very often you find this fresh forming, allowing some. But that with Jenlin's philosophy, it might be possible to understand living process as a formulating process in general. That's something, you know, that also a flower is a formulating, or you know, and that's something I find so exciting. And I would love to stutter and stammer and talk a little bit about this, you know, our formulation process and what the flower is doing.
Something that I would like us to look at some point. And it is that question of what is the self?
Yeah, yeah.
And one way of formulating that is when Gendlin says, the person is what looks back at you.
Yeah.
And my question is, since we're not talking about an entity self, what is it? What is this person that looks back?
Yeah.
It's not content, it's not a thing.
No,
It's what
no.
is it? And maybe that even relates to your
Yes.
question. So
Wow, that's really something. Yes. Yeah. And maybe, you know, just as a handle, you know, it's I really, there's some, I haven't never yet said it like that, but you know, it's like a vulnerable world looking at you.
yeah. Mhm.
Okay, let's see how we can, talk about that.
Okay, thank you very much
Thank you, Greg.
and see you next time.
See you next time. Okay.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.